you ever wondered what really happens in that breathtaking moment when life slips quietly away? Imagine for a second that your body has stopped, but somehow you're still watching, aware of everything around you. Countless people who've crossed the threshold and returned share astonishingly similar stories, floating gently above their bodies, being drawn toward a radiant, welcoming light, or experiencing profound peace unlike anything they've known before. In this video, you'll hear these gripping first-hand accounts and discover insights from spiritual traditions worldwide. But the ending might just surprise you. It reveals something powerful and comforting about our very existence. If you're curious to know more about the soul's journey beyond death, keep watching. And please consider subscribing. Your support allows us to continue uncovering these extraordinary stories and exploring the deepest questions of life and beyond. The moment we commonly call the final breath is often pictured as an abrupt cessation, a collapse into silence followed by an empty void. But for generations, mystical and philosophical traditions worldwide have questioned that assumption, suggesting that what we experience as the end of physical life might actually be the beginning of a deeper, more expansive journey. Contemporary first-hand accounts, particularly those from people who have survived near-death experiences, have added vivid testimony to the possibility that death is not a disappearance into oblivion, but rather a threshold crossing, subtle yet extraordinarily profound. The paradox is striking. We assume that when the lungs no longer rise and the heart ceases to beat, consciousness must end. Yet these individuals repeatedly state that awareness not only persists, but feels heightened. Imagine witnessing your final exhale. Perhaps it's just a slow sigh, then realizing quite suddenly that you're not confined to the body that no longer moves. A curious calm replaces what we'd logically expect to be panic or dread. In this new perspective, physical motion stops, but you remain an observer, still very much present, still perceiving, albeit without the usual tools of the five senses. This sense of quiet observation often comes across in spiritual or philosophical teachings as a reminder that we are not exclusively flesh and bone. Religious texts, whether from Christianity or Buddhism, emphasize that the body is more like a vessel, a temporary container for a consciousness that transcends material constraints. If we step back and explore the historical record from ancient Egyptian funerary scripts to Tibetan Buddhist texts, we find consistent portrayals of a transition phase that follows the cessation of breath. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the soul with its multiple facets, like the Ba and Ka, continues a journey beyond physical life, facing trials and revelations in realms unknown to the ordinary waking world. Similarly, Tibetan tradition describes the bardo, an intermediate state where the soul navigates illusions and clarity influenced greatly by one's karma, and the capacity to recognize the illusory nature of appearances. To the modern mind, shaped by scientific materialism, these descriptions might sound symbolic or allegorical. However, many who undergo near-death experiences return with accounts that mirror these ancient teachings, reports of floating above their own bodies, sensing surroundings without eyes or ears, and feeling an incredible tranquility that words fail to capture. Although neuroscience may offer some theories about how oxygen-deprived brains produce hallucinations, the accuracy of many NDE reports, where people recount events from vantage points they simply shouldn't have, invites deeper questions. If the brain is supposed to be inert, how are these experiences so remarkably lucid? This leads to a compelling possibility. Perhaps the final breath is not the final punctuation of our existence. Instead, It could be a gateway into another mode of being where time and physical constraints as we know them recede. As you will see throughout these reflections, the prevailing theme in both ancient and contemporary accounts is that awareness endures. The quiet hush that follows the last exhale might not be an ending at all. It might be a soft opening into a dimension of experience that lies beyond our habitual perception. Once the breath subsides, many traditions suggest that a gentle pause ensues a holy stillness, if you will, where the soul or consciousness hovers before moving onward. While the body itself may appear lifeless, subtle awareness continues entering a space devoid of the usual markers of time. In Tibetan Buddhism, this interval is called a bardo, and the teachings in the Tibetan Book of the Dead provide guidance for navigating this transitional phase. According to these teachings, the mind or consciousness is suspended in a vivid clarity, no longer grounded in the physical form. Stripped of its former anchors, heartbeats, brain waves, the mechanical processes of the body. This consciousness can expand in ways unimaginable during ordinary waking life. In the West, we're more accustomed to the clinical markers of death, such as the flatlining on an electrocardiogram or electroencephalogram. Still, near-death experiencers often return to describe how they felt more alive or awake in those moments than they ever did in their bodies. They recount becoming acutely aware of their surroundings, even noticing details in other hospital rooms or picking up on conversations that occurred far from their physical form. Critics sometimes argue these are hallucinations, but many experiences have been corroborated by independent observers, presenting a puzzle that challenges the reigning assumption that consciousness depends solely on the brain's normal functioning. Interestingly, people who have had these experiences often mention a surreal calm. They report an absence of the panic one might anticipate. Rather than feeling terror upon seeing themselves from above, they express curiosity or even acceptance. It is as though the primal fear of death we carry while alive dissipates once we actually cross that boundary. Why would this be the case? Philosophically, it may be because consciousness unencumbered by a biological survival mechanism no longer perceives death as a threat. Spiritually, it may confirm age-old teachings that we are not the body, but the witness behind it, and once free of physical constraints, we recognize our eternal nature. From a comparative standpoint, nearly every major religious or spiritual traditions includes concepts that parallel this sense of hovering awareness. The Christian worldview speaks of souls being greeted by angelic presences. Hinduism depicts the subtle body continuing on a journey shaped by past karma. Native American beliefs in many tribes view death not as an end, but as a return to the spirit world, a shift in frequency or dimension. In all these traditions, the message is consistent. Death marks the conclusion of physical existence, but not the end of being. The sense of I am remains intact, at least for a while. And in that state, we gain access to insights denied to us by the hustle of daily living. Underpinning all this is the notion that time dissolves. No longer chained to the ticking clock, consciousness rests in an expanded present. The pause that ensues after the final breath becomes a space of discovery, where the essence of who we are can gaze upon the body, as though it were a garment we wore now neatly folded and left behind. When we consider the accounts of near-death experiences in light of ancient sacred texts, a remarkable convergence becomes apparent. People repeatedly describe rising above their bodies, feeling weightless, and experiencing a field of 360-degree awareness. It's as if the body's sensory limitations fall away, granting an extraordinary panoramic vision. Alongside that, there is often an emotional or empathic expansion that allows them to perceive not just the environment, but also the emotional states of others nearby. In certain cases, individuals recount seeing loved ones praying in distant locations, later verifying the accuracy of what was observed. Such narratives push us to question the boundaries of consciousness. Can the mind exist independently of the brain, or do these experiences arise from final neural firings akin to a last gasp of the dying brain? The debate remains lively among scientists, skeptics, and experiencers. Mainstream neuroscience generally asserts that mental states are products of brain activity. Hence, once the brain is non-functional, experiences should cease. Yet the unwavering detail and profound coherence in many NDE testimonies suggest that consciousness might be more resilient and independent than we previously thought. Interestingly, Tibetan Buddhism and other Eastern philosophies advocates the view that mind precedes matter. According to certain Buddhist teachings, consciousness is the primary fabric of reality, and the physical dimension is more like a stage upon which consciousness interacts. The analogy might be that the brain is a receiver or filter tuning into consciousness, much like a radio tunes into signals. When the radio breaks, the signal does not vanish. It remains, but the device can no longer pick it up. Transposed to human experience, it could mean that when the body dies, consciousness continues, possibly shifting frequencies to inhabit a subtler realm. This would explain why, instead of feeling their awareness go dark, many people report an enlargement of perspective. The constraints of the physical form, such as the need for oxygen or the limitations of 5 senses, give way to a sense of freedom. And in that freedom, fear often recedes. Far from the terror we associate with approaching death, the newly transcended consciousness encounters a pervasive calm. This resonates strongly with the gentle acceptance described in many spiritual traditions at the moment of passing. One might argue that our cultural fear of death stems from the identification with the physical body as the totality of self. Yet these first-hand reports and millennia of spiritual teachings invite us to question that assumption. They suggest that the final breath is not the termination of identity, but the shedding of one layer. Indeed, multiple references throughout religious history describe the body as a vehicle or clothing we temporarily don, while the true self remains a constant observer behind the scenes. The shift from living in the body to hovering above it in an instant seems less daunting when viewed from this lens. We might wonder if letting go of the body reveals a more expansive consciousness. What if our ordinary waking life is the more restricted state? Cultures worldwide have long recognized a transitional realm beyond the final breath, one often marked by symbolic or literal guides that assist the departing soul. Ancient Egypt, for instance, offered vivid imagery of the duat, a shadowy realm that required careful navigation, often with the aid of spells, amulets, and divine helpers. We see a parallel in Tibetan Buddhism's Bardo teachings, which prepare practitioners to recognize illusory visions that might appear after death. These illusions can be angels, demons, or other archetypal manifestations, yet all are understood to be projections of the soul's own consciousness. What stands out in many near-death or after-death accounts is the presence of a guiding figure or force. Sometimes it's described as a being of light, exuding warmth and unconditional love. Other times it's seen as an ancestral spirit or cherished deity, bridging the gap between the soul's familiar life and the uncharted territory ahead. In some accounts, individuals describe telepathic communication with these guides who help them navigate the immediate aftermath of physical death. this parallels the roles of psychopomps in various mythologies, beings designated to escort souls into the afterlife, ensuring a safe passage. The universality of these guide narratives suggests that consciousness is not merely left adrift upon the cessation of breath. Instead, there might be a structure or process embedded in the fabric of existence that unfolds after we die. This structural aspect doesn't necessarily imply a rigid dogma. It could be as flexible as consciousness itself. One soul might see an angelic being because that resonates with their beliefs and symbols, while another might perceive a radiant guide matching a different tradition. Underlying these diverse forms, however, is the sense of a caring intelligence that supports the newly liberated consciousness. Moreover, the notion of illusions appearing in the post-death state is a recurring theme. Tibetan teachings emphasize that if a person fails to recognize these illusions as self-projections, they could become frightened and thus bound more closely to the cycle of rebirth. Alternatively, recognizing them as mind-created phenomena can lead to liberation. This hints at a dynamic environment where our mental and emotional states continue to shape our experience, even when the physical body is gone. Fear might manifest as nightmarish visions, while love and trust might attract benevolent scenes or guides. Such ideas also resonate with Western esoteric traditions. In Hermetic thought and certain strands of Kabbalah, the astral plane is said to be highly responsive to thought, so that entities, landscapes, and experiences shift according to the mind's focus. It underscores a profound implication: the quality of our consciousness at the time of death matters. The personal work of self-awareness and emotional healing during life may play a significant role in determining what sort of environment we encounter once we cross the threshold. Cultivating compassion and wisdom becomes not just an ethical imperative, but also a practical preparation for navigating the afterlife. One of the most commonly mentioned elements of the near-death and post-death narrative is the life review. In an almost instantaneous manner, though time as we know it doesn't really apply, individuals describe revisiting every event, relationship, and choice from their life. Yet this isn't just a visual replay, it is an immersive reliving. They feel not only what they experienced, but also the impact their words and actions had on others. If they caused harm, they sense the hurt as if it were their own. If they offered comfort or kindness, they feel the peace and relief it brought. This phenomenon echoes the ancient Egyptian ceremony of the weighing of the heart, in which the heart of the deceased is balanced against a feather representing truth and cosmic order, Ma'at. Rather than a punitive ordeal, it is more a test of authenticity. If the heart is weighed down by guilt and negativity, it cannot ascend. Tibetan Buddhism similarly depicts karmic imagery in the bardo, reflecting the moral and emotional imprints carried from one's life. Early Christian mystics also spoke of a reckoning not so much in the sense of condemnation, but as an inevitable confrontation with the truth of how one has lived. The radical empathy described in these life reviews suggests a universe that operates on principles of interconnection. We don't exist in isolation. Every thought, word, and deed reverberates into the collective. Thus, the life review can be transformative. People who have returned from near-death states often report profound changes in their behavior, adopting more compassionate lifestyles. They describe the clarity of seeing how interconnected everything truly is, how a small act of kindness can radiate hope, and how an unkind gesture can propagate sorrow. The moral weight doesn't come from an external judge, but from an innate realization that what we do to others, we ultimately do to ourselves. Critically, many accounts emphasize that this review is not accompanied by condemnation from an outside force. Instead, there is a sense of self-judgment or self-realization that emerges from within. The being of light, or the guide when present, reflects unconditional acceptance, leaving the individual to come to terms with their own deeds. This resonates with the idea that God or Source is not an external authority meting out punishments, but an infinite intelligence of love and truth within which we measure ourselves. Understanding the life review can have practical applications in everyday living. Recognizing that every encounter holds meaning, that our words can either heal or harm, fosters a deliberate awareness. It becomes less about fear of judgment after death and more about recognizing the ripple effects we create in every moment. If we adopt the perspective that death is a transition and not a full stop, then what we do here and now has lasting consequences for the consciousness that continues. The life review, therefore, stands not as a dreaded trial, but as a wise teacher guiding us to live more aligned with compassion, honesty, and understanding. In addition to seeing how one's actions impacted others, many people who undergo this life review report witnessing the underlying motivations behind each action. This is a critical distinction because it suggests that moral or spiritual growth is not solely about external deeds, but also about the consciousness or intention animating those deeds. A gesture of kindness performed reluctantly or to bolster one's ego carries a different energetic imprint than the same gesture offered out of unconditional love. The life review, as described by near-death experiences, doesn't just replay events. It reveals the why of each choice. This emphasis on intention is mirrored in various philosophical frameworks. In Buddhism, for example, karmic seeds are said to be planted not only by the action itself, but by the underlying mind state, greed, anger, or ignorance versus generosity, compassion, or wisdom. In Christian mysticism, the focus is often on the heart's sincerity when performing acts of charity. Across cultures, there's a consistent notion that authenticity matters. We can't hide from ourselves. Once we transition, as the layers of self-deception we maintain in life tend to peel away in the afterlife. This process can be both enlightening and challenging. Enlightening because it offers unparalleled clarity about our true motivations, challenging because it confronts us with the discrepancies between how we might have portrayed ourselves and who we actually were inside. Yet even this confrontation is typically described as loving or instructive rather than harshly punitive. The purpose seems to be realization and growth, encouraging the soul to evolve rather than merely punishing mistakes. That said, the revelations during the life review can be profound enough to sway individuals who come back to drastically alter their life choices. Some have quit harmful habits, mended broken relationships, or pursued careers dedicated to service after glimpsing the moral tapestry of their actions. The sense of interconnection becomes undeniable. Perhaps this is why many near-death experiencers describe their survival as a kind of second chance, a chance to live in alignment with the lessons they learned. Scholars who study these accounts point out that despite cultural variations, the core elements of the life review remain remarkably consistent. Whether one grows up in a secular, religious, or spiritual household, the experience of reliving every detail with an enhanced sense of empathy is strikingly similar. This consistency prompts us to consider that the phenomenon might be a universal aspect of consciousness rather than a culturally manufactured narrative. From a more scientific vantage, we can consider the possibility that the life review is a deeply embedded psychological or existential mechanism triggered at the threshold of death. Yet, even if it were purely psychological, the lesson remains potent. How we live, and especially how we treat others, echoes into the very essence of who we are. An essence that many believe survives bodily death. The mirror of intention then emerges as a guiding principle for how we might conduct ourselves, reinforcing the idea that every gesture and every underlying motivation indeed matters. Beyond the life review, a pivotal choice often presents itself, whether to move forward into transcendent light or to return to physical life, if such a return is even an option. Those who've had near-death experiences sometimes describe a distinct threshold, a boundary they cannot cross if they wish to remain in the world of the living. It might manifest as a literal barrier, like a fence, a river, or a door, or as a purely intuitive sense that should they proceed further, they would not be able to go back. This liminal space can be fraught with conflicting emotions, the overwhelming allure of unconditional love on one side and the tug of unfinished responsibilities on the other. In many spiritual traditions, we find references to the soul's choice at death. Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, speaks of the potential to recognize the clear light of the mind in the bardo. And if one does so, liberation can be instantaneous. Alternatively, the soul could be pulled back into samsaric existence influenced by karmic habits. Similarly, certain interpretations in Hinduism suggest that if the soul is not yet free from desires or attachments, it naturally gravitates toward rebirth. The Christian idea of purgatory also revolves around purification and readiness for heaven, though the theological details differ. What stands out in personal testimonies is how often the choice to return is fueled by love. People speak of thinking about their children, spouses, or parents and realize they are not ready to leave these loved ones behind. Sometimes a guide or a being of light communicates, "Your work on earth is not yet done," or "It's not your time," prompting the soul to turn back. While cynics might label these experiences as the brain's final illusions, they undeniably transform those who return, often resulting in a profound shift in life priorities. In some cases, the soul may linger in a liminal state, neither fully crossing over nor reanimating the body immediately. This phenomenon could account for hauntings or ghostly presences according to various cultural interpretations, where the deceased remains earthbound due to attachments like unfinished business, unresolved conflict, or even an unwillingness to accept death. Yet in most religious frameworks, there is the belief that the soul is ultimately drawn onward by forces that align with its deepest resonance. That resonance could be love, regret, duty, curiosity, or spiritual aspiration. This intersection of free will and cosmic flow poses fascinating philosophical questions. Are we entirely free to choose our destiny after death? Or is the pull of our accumulated karmic patterns too strong to resist? Does grace intervene? The tapestry of beliefs suggests a blend of both. We have choice, but our capacity to choose is shaped by the consciousness we've cultivated in life. The more aware we are, the more freedom we have. The more tangled in ignorance or attachment, the more we gravitate toward unconscious repetition. The near-death testimonies tend to reinforce the notion that love and readiness are the dominant factors determining whether one crosses that threshold or returns to complete their earthly mission. For those who do not return to their bodies, many traditions speak of subsequent stages or realms that the soul navigates. Tibetan Buddhism provides a detailed map of the bardos, describing how illusions shaped by one's mind can appear as wrathful or peaceful deities. Christian mysticism in certain apocryphal texts outlines journeys through various celestial spheres or purgatorial realms, each reflecting a level of spiritual purification. Sufi teachings and other Islamic esoteric doctrines explore the idea of the barzakh, a realm between the physical world and the final abode where souls await resurrection or continue to undergo transformations. All these traditions emphasize that the afterlife is not a single uniform place, but a series of potential states or dimensions. The nature of these realms often mirrors one's inner landscape. This explains why some souls report experiences akin to a heavenly paradise filled with luminous beings, while others seem trapped in darker, more oppressive environments. The difference lies not in an external judgment, but in the soul's vibration shaped by its fears, attachments, or virtues. Interestingly, many near-death narratives confirm this variability. Some experiences describe realms of indescribable beauty, vast fields of light music beyond earthly comprehension, or landscapes that shimmer with an otherworldly glow. Others describe passing through regions that feel more neutral or even dull, as though the soul is in a waiting room. A minority recall terrifying or unpleasant encounters, which they later interpret as confrontations with their own guilt, fear, or negativity. These variations align closely with the concept that the soul's consciousness acts like a magnet, drawing experiences that reflect its state of being. In certain metaphysical viewpoints, these realms are sometimes called astral or etheric planes, each with distinct vibrations and inhabitants. Rosicrucian and theosophical writings elaborate on these levels, suggesting that souls might spend time in an environment similar to their own mental and emotional makeup, evolving or healing until they are ready for further progression. The overall theme is that the universe operates as an ongoing school for the soul, both in life and after death, where lessons continue to unfold. It's worth noting that while many accounts highlight the malleable nature of these realms responding to thought and intention almost instantly, there remains an overarching continuity. We are still us in some essential sense, carrying forward our inclinations, habits, and unresolved issues, or conversely, our spiritual attainments and compassionate tendencies. Death does not produce instant omniscience or moral perfection. Growth remains possible, and in some instances essential if the soul is to move beyond self-imposed limitations. This perspective counters the idea that the afterlife is a static binary outcome, eternal reward or punishment. Instead, it proposes a dynamic continuum, aligning more with the notion of an ongoing journey. By interpreting these stages as reflections of our inner state, we reclaim a degree of responsibility and possibility. The experiences encountered beyond the veil become catalysts for deeper realization, prompting the soul to continually choose love over fear, understanding over judgment, and clarity over illusion. Eventually, most teachings agree on a possibility of full integration, sometimes called liberation, ascension, or union with the divine. Yet this is not universally depicted as the immediate fate of every departing soul. Rather, it's described as a culmination of conscious evolution, a point at which individual identity merges so profoundly with universal consciousness that the soul no longer experiences itself as separate. The process of getting there varies from one tradition to another, but the underlying principle remains consistent. The journey is an inward shift toward recognizing that what we call God's source or ultimate reality is also the deepest layer of our own being. This potential unification is often described through metaphors of water returning to the ocean or a spark merging with the cosmic fire. In Eastern philosophies, moksha, Hinduism, and nirvana Buddhism symbolize the cessation of the delusion of separation. In Sufism, it's fana, the annihilation of the ego in the beloved. Christian contemplatives speak of mystical union, the marriage of the soul with Christ. Each path outlines both the awe and the surrender required for such a union to occur. Near-death experiencers who brush up against this state frequently express that words fail to capture its grandeur. They describe an overwhelming sense of oneness, peace, and unconditional love that eclipses anything in ordinary life. Not everyone, however, feels ready or drawn to dissolve into that oneness right away. Some souls, as reported in spiritual literature, choose to remain in subtler realms, functioning as guides or ascended masters, assisting others on their journeys. These are the narratives behind traditions of bodhisattvas in Buddhism who postpone their final liberation out of compassion for all beings still suffering in samsara. Western esoteric traditions contain similar ideas, often referencing councils of light or advanced souls who guide humanity from higher planes. This suggests that the afterlife, far from being a monolithic end state, includes multiple paths and choices. One might progress through a series of revelations, life reviews, and lessons before arriving at a fork to dissolve into the absolute, or to continue serving in a distinct identity for a while longer. The choice, according to many teachings, hinges on the soul's readiness and its vows or desires. The consciousness we carry into death is the same consciousness that encounters these possibilities, and the illusions or clarity we hold on to shape our trajectory. For those who do step into union, testimonies paint an experience of indescribable bliss and wholeness. The concept of time falls away entirely, replaced by an eternal now. This can be so vast, so all-encompassing, that returning to a singular perspective might feel like contracting into a narrow framework once again. It's small wonder then that many near-death experiencers who glimpse even a fraction of this unity find themselves transformed when they come back. Having tasted the oceanic oneness, the thirst for spiritual understanding becomes insatiable, driving them to live in a way that reflects the unconditional love and boundless acceptance they briefly experienced. An intriguing question arises about the nature of self in the face of such unity. If our identity merges into the source, do we lose everything we once cherished, like individual preferences or personal memories? The mystical answer often proposes that nothing truly valuable is lost. Rather, all illusions of separateness dissolve. The drop of water doesn't cease to exist when it re-enters the ocean. It just stops perceiving itself as distinct. In that oceanic oneness, every experience that contributed to our unique perspective is preserved as part of the greater whole. Yet the vantage point shifts from the isolated I to the cosmic we, or even the universal I am, depending on which tradition you consult. It's also important to note that not every soul is compelled to merge immediately. Many traditions describe intermediate planes where souls can continue learning, resting, or working through attachments. These realms can be quite exquisite. Some call them heavenly or astral domains, but they are not considered the final absolute unity. The Catholic notion of purgatory might in a certain light be understood similarly, a state of cleansing or refinement before the soul is ready to fully unite with the divine. The Eastern concept of reincarnation further complicates matters, proposing that the soul returns to earthly life to resolve unfinished lessons or serve specific purposes. In the swirl of these possibilities, free will retains its significance. The soul, in many accounts, is not forcibly dragged into union nor forced to return to form. There is an element of attraction toward love, truth, and unity, but also a recognition that the soul's journey is individual. Some souls described as old souls may be closer to that final unity. Others, likened to new or younger souls, may have a series of incarnations ahead. What remains consistent is that all are ultimately evolving toward remembrance of their true divine nature. Here, modern near-death experiences offer fascinating glimpses. Some individuals report being shown potential future lives or learning about soul contracts, pre-birth agreements to experience certain challenges or relationships. Others describe realms of creativity and research where souls explore cosmic principles or learn about universal laws. The afterlife thus appears as an unfolding continuum, not a simple question of heaven or hell. Instead, it's a multifaceted universe teeming with learning opportunities. This perspective can have profound implications for how we approach our daily life. If the journey continues, and if the states we inhabit after death directly mirror our consciousness, then cultivating qualities like love, mindfulness, and service to others becomes an investment in our eternal evolution. It might also reduce the fear of death, reframing it from a grim terminus to a transitional gateway, albeit one that demands we face ourselves without the filters we cling to in mortal life. Paradoxically, by contemplating our post-death trajectories, we may become more alive, more present, more purposeful, and more willing to engage with life's richness, while we still have this unique earthly platform. Another layer of complexity arises when we consider the concept of reincarnation, encountered not just in Eastern religions like Hinduism and Buddhism, but also in esoteric streams of Christianity, such as certain Gnostic sects and various tribal belief systems across Africa and the Americas. If the soul indeed returns to physical form multiple times, the after-death experience might simply be a chapter in a much longer narrative. Our vantage widens to see each life as one thread in an ongoing tapestry, where lessons, relationships, and karmic ties weave together across epochs. From this angle, the final breath isn't final at all. It's merely the end of one chapter. The experiences that follow life reviews transitional realms. Possible unions with higher states of consciousness serve as interludes, offering the soul a chance to process and integrate before stepping back into the material plane. The impetus for reincarnation might be a desire for further growth, a longing to help certain individuals, or an unresolved pattern that can only be addressed through physical challenges. In near-death testimonies, some people recall glimpses of past lives or claim they were shown how certain relationships extended beyond the current incarnation. While skeptics question these claims, they are strikingly uniform across distinct cultures and historical periods. Past life regression therapy, a modern psychological spiritual practice, also aligns with these ideas. Individuals under hypnosis sometimes report memories that do not correlate with their current life, describing historical details they later verify. Whether these accounts reflect literal past lives or symbolic narratives from the unconscious is debated, but for those who experience them, they often hold transformative power. They illustrate how one's soul journey seems to extend in all directions, bridging what we label as past, present, and future. If we accept reincarnation as a framework, the question arises, do we inevitably move through cycles of birth and death until we attain enlightenment or union? According to Buddhist teachings, yes, unless we awaken to the true nature of mind. Similarly, certain Hindu lineages emphasize the quest to break the cycle of samsara, fueled by the recognition that worldly achievements and pleasures cannot fully satisfy the soul's longing for divine reunion. The stories we've explored of luminous tunnels, life reviews, personal guides, illusions, and the potential to merge with the source fit neatly into this cyclical worldview, forming a grand tapestry that extends beyond any single lifetime. Yet not everyone chooses to come back. Some advanced souls, upon reaching certain realizations, might opt to remain in subtler realms or move fully into the divine embrace. Others, motivated by compassion, might adopt the bodhisattva path, returning voluntarily to assist others, despite having the option of final liberation. This interplay of free will, karmic momentum, and compassionate choice enriches the discussion around what truly happens after death, hinting that each individual's journey is a complex, evolving story. Ultimately, whether we view reincarnation as literal or metaphorical, the notion that consciousness persists and transforms across multiple lifetimes invites us to live with a sense of continuity and responsibility that extends well beyond one mortal coil. Yet another theme woven through these reflections is the concept of Akashic records, or cosmic archives, in which every event, intention, and emotion is stored. The term Akasha comes from Sanskrit, referring to the subtle etheric field that holds imprints of all that has transpired, and possibly all that could transpire. While the idea is most famously integrated into theosophical and certain Eastern teachings, you can find parallels in Western esotericism, Gnostic Christianity, and even among visionary individuals who claim to have tapped into a universal library of sorts. During near-death experiences, some individuals report being shown vast repositories of knowledge, something akin to a cosmic library, where the patterns of multiple lifetimes can be comprehended in a single sweep of insight. They describe the sense of downloading entire chapters of spiritual understanding in moments that feel both instantaneous and eternal. For many, this contact with expanded knowledge reveals how intricately lives interweave. The myriad choices we make ripple out into a tapestry that touches countless other souls, forging connections that might last across eons. Skeptics could argue that such visions are purely imaginative constructs of the mind under duress. Yet those who have returned often bring back profound revelations about universal principles. They may emerge with insights into quantum interconnection, advanced healing techniques, or philosophical perspectives that they had never studied nor considered previously. From a purely materialistic standpoint, the question remains: how does a non-functioning or low-functioning brain generate such detailed, coherent experiences? Science has yet to provide a definitive answer, keeping the door open to possibilities that consciousness might be interacting with a field of knowledge beyond the constraints of individual memory. This concept aligns well with the notion that the cosmos operates as a grand school where souls continuously learn. The Akashic records can be seen as the collective memory of this school. For those exploring this territory after death, the records offer an expansive vantage, showing not just a single life, but how that life fits into larger patterns. It's reminiscent of the fractal geometries found in nature, where a small part reflects the structure of the whole. Encountering the Akashic field could also shed light on why certain souls feel drawn to particular eras, relationships, or life themes. If our future incarnations are shaped by the learning arcs documented in these records, then the afterlife becomes a fertile ground for charting the next course. Decisions made in that realm, where we briefly or permanently reside between incarnations, may set the stage for the challenges or blessings we face when and if we return to physical existence. It underscores the remarkable continuity of consciousness, presenting death not as a severance but as a checkpoint, allowing the soul to reorient and gather the wisdom needed for the journey ahead. An intriguing insight emerging from these convergent narratives is that the afterlife might not be so different from life itself, at least in terms of the principle that we create our reality through consciousness. While alive, our thoughts, beliefs, and emotions shape our experiences, albeit indirectly. In the post-death state, many traditions suggest this principle becomes more immediate and intense. The illusions or beauties we encounter are the direct reflections of our mental and emotional states. In Tibetan Buddhism, it's said that the mind unbound by the body can project entire worlds in the bardo, blissful or hellish, depending on the seeds we've sown. This concept appears in various Christian mystic writings as well, where heaven or hell is perceived as a state of the heart, rather than merely a geographic location. Why does this matter? If our consciousness wields creative power beyond the veil, then we bear a profound responsibility for the mental states we cultivate during life. Holding on to anger, regret, or vengeance can color our after-death reality. Conversely, developing forgiveness, love, and acceptance can brighten the path ahead, potentially smoothing our transition. This understanding refocuses our perspective on personal growth and emotional healing, not just as moral niceties, but as tangible preparations for a journey we will all eventually undertake. The near-death experiences that reference realms of hell or torment often depict them as transient states, not eternal condemnations. Souls appear able to shift out of these darker spaces by recognizing their own role in creating them and by opening to love or guidance. This stands in sharp contrast to depictions of eternal damnation in some religious doctrines. While certain interpretations of theology hold fast to the idea of everlasting punishment, the broader array of post-death experiences suggests a more fluid educative process. The hell encountered is more of a self-generated state of suffering that can be transcended when understanding and compassion dawn. Likewise, heavenly realms may also be stepping stones rather than final endpoints. As many esoteric teachings propose, a soul might linger in blissful zones for a period resting from the rigors of earthly life. However, unless it has reached that ultimate state of oneness or chooses to remain there in service, further evolution beckons. This cyclical or spiral dynamic, where consciousness continually explores new layers of reality, reinforces the notion of existence as an ever-expanding journey. Importantly, these insights do not demand that you subscribe to a particular religion. They can be approached metaphorically, psychologically, or through a transpersonal lens that sees them as symbolic truths about the deeper nature of mind. Whether literal or symbolic, they can offer solace or inspiration to those wrestling with the fear of death. Instead of dreading a final reckoning, one can prepare for an encounter with deeper truths that we ourselves have been weaving all along. By cultivating awareness and love in our day-to-day choices, we essentially compose the script for the reality we'll face in that post-breath expanse. Bringing these themes full circle, we return to the threshold moment of the final breath. Through countless cultural lenses and individual testimonies, we've glimpsed how this moment might unfold an exhalation that dissolves the boundary between life and afterlife. Contrary to the Western secular view that sees death as the cessation of all experience, a broader tapestry emerges one of continued awareness. Life reviews transitions through subtle realms, potential reunions with guiding presences, and possibly the revelation of soul-level lessons. Whether one interprets these accounts as literal realities, symbolic representations, or psychologically induced experiences, they consistently convey a reverence for the sacredness of existence and the interconnectedness of all beings. For many near-death experiencers, the immediate aftermath of leaving the body is marked by a profound serenity, even if confusion follows. They speak of floating or drifting through a luminous landscape or a tunnel of light guided by an intuition they trust implicitly. The hush that accompanies the final breath, therefore, seems less like the end of a story and more like the turning of a page. That new page often contains the reflection of how they've lived the forging of deeper empathy or direct encounter with the luminous essence of reality. Moreover, a key message emerges that resonates with ancient wisdom traditions. Our everyday lives are inseparable from what happens after we die. The intentions we set, the love we cultivate, the wounds we heal, they all come with us shaping the environment of our next phase. This interdependency between life and afterlife underscores why so many teachings emphasize living consciously, practicing compassion, and seeking self-understanding. Death, in this view, is not a dreaded cut-off point, but a mirror revealing the choices we've made and the state of heart we've nurtured. On a practical level, this perspective encourages us to engage in spiritual or psychological practices that deepen our self-awareness and capacity for love. Meditation, prayer, reflective journaling, or contemplative reading can all be ways to explore the terrain of consciousness before we face the final breath. Engaging in honest self-examination akin to a mini life review can help us resolve regrets and clarify our priorities. Forgiveness work both for ourselves and others can lighten the load of emotional baggage. Building genuine compassion, gratitude, and humility can raise our vibrational frequency, so to speak, aligning us more closely with the peaceful and luminous states described in these accounts. For those who hold no particular spiritual or religious beliefs, the essential principles still hold relevance. Being kind, taking responsibility for our actions, and finding meaning in our connections can enrich our current lives. Even if one remains skeptical about an afterlife, it's difficult to deny the psychological or moral value of living with empathy and mindfulness. Ironically, preparing for what lies beyond might simply mean learning to be more fully present, here and now. In contemplating the moment after that final breath, we stand at the intersection of wonder and humility. These age-old teachings and contemporary testimonies invite us to look beyond the threshold of mortality and consider that we might be part of a much grander story, one that continues to unfold in dimensions we cannot yet fully fathom. Whether we label it an afterlife, another frequency of existence, or a deeper layer of reality, the point remains. The journey may not end when our lungs grow still. Instead, that quiet moment could usher us into the next chapter of an eternal becoming, shaped by the love, wisdom, and authenticity we have chosen to embody in our fleeting yet precious human sojourn. Having explored the foundational themes of the afterlife journey, life reviews realms of consciousness, guiding presences, we can now delve deeper into the subtle ways these concepts resonate with human psychology and spirituality in daily life. One could argue that we are each living our own microcosm of the death experience in every moment. By this, I mean that we constantly undergo smaller cycles of endings and beginnings. Relationships, careers, beliefs, and even aspects of our personality die off, making space for something new to emerge. In this sense, our everyday existence already holds a pattern that mirrors death and rebirth on a smaller scale. If the consciousness we cultivate now truly shapes our after-death experience, then this constant process of transformation becomes doubly significant. When an individual experiences a profound shift in perspective, say a spiritual awakening or even a crisis that forces a re-evaluation of priorities, it can feel like a mini-death of the old self. Old values and assumptions fade, replaced by a fresh awareness. In many ways, near-death experiencers who return describe a similar feeling, only magnified. They often recount that when they came back to the body, they no longer carried the same fears or illusions that had dominated their prior life. The ephemeral nature of existence became startlingly clear, prompting them to shed attachments they once deemed crucial. This echoes the notion that something must die within us for genuine growth to occur. Moreover, these ideas challenge us to reflect on how we might approach our own eventual passing. And not only that, but how we handle everyday conflicts and changes. Are we clinging to outdated emotions or grudges that could weigh down our consciousness both now and after death? If post-death realms reflect our inner state, then harboring unresolved anger or deep-seated guilt might conjure harsh environments in the bardo or astral planes. Conversely, developing forgiveness and compassion now could lead to more luminous encounters once the physical shell is shed. This practical application underscores that preparing for death isn't about morbid obsession, but about fostering a mindset that is free, open, and loving whatever dimension we find ourselves in. In fact, certain monastic traditions in both East and West encourage the contemplation of mortality, specifically to heighten one's appreciation of life and to refine one's values. Monks in ancient Christian monasteries would keep skulls on their desks as reminders of life's brevity. In Tibetan, practice practitioners might visualize their own death to cultivate impermanence, which often dissolves petty attachments and focuses the mind on compassion and wisdom. By doing so, they aim to master the transitions that occur during life, priming themselves for the larger transition that comes at the end of physical existence. All of this implies a profound synergy between how we live and how we die. There is no hard line that abruptly appears at the last breath. Rather, our moment-to-moment consciousness forms the tapestry we step into when the body stops. By weaving threads of mindfulness, empathy, and inner peace throughout our daily routines, we effectively pave the way for a more graceful crossing and a gentler afterlife environment. One of the intriguing aspects of post-death narratives is their capacity to heal those who remain alive. People grieving the loss of a loved one sometimes find solace in near-death experience. NDE accounts taking comfort in the possibility that their departed is not gone but simply transitioned. Although critics might argue that such comfort is built on an unverified premise, the psychological benefits can still be profound. Widows, widowers, and children often describe how reading or hearing about luminous tunnels, benevolent guides, and life reviews softens the raw edges of their grief. It reframes the loss as a passage, suggesting an ongoing relationship that extends beyond the grave, if not in a physical sense, then in a realm of continued consciousness. In hospice care, there is growing openness to discussing these afterlife ideas. Some hospice workers share that patients on the brink of death commonly report visits from deceased relatives or describe glimpses of radiant landscapes. This phenomenon, sometimes referred to as deathbed visions, is often accompanied by a sense of peace and reconciliation. From a medical standpoint, skeptics classify these visions as hallucinations prompted by medication or the body shutting down. From a spiritual or transpersonal perspective, such encounters might be taken as authentic previews of the realm awaiting the patient's transition. Regardless of interpretation, these visions frequently mitigate fear and help individuals face their final moments with acceptance rather than resistance. The role of ritual also comes into focus here. Almost every culture has ceremonial practices surrounding death funerals, wakes memorial services that serve a dual function to honor the deceased and to guide the living through the mourning process. Within traditions that believe in an afterlife, these rituals can also be directed at aiding the departed soul. Tibetan Buddhists, for example, may read aloud from the Tibetan Book of the Dead in the presence of the recently deceased, offering navigational cues for the bardo. Similarly, Christian funerals sometimes incorporate prayers for the soul's safe passage. Even secular ceremonies, while not invoking a specific spiritual dimension, offer communal support and acknowledgement that the deceased's influence lives on in the hearts of survivors. In this context, the question arises, how much of our ceremony and grief process might be more than symbolic if consciousness truly persists? Could our collective love prayers or focused intentions help the departed navigate their afterlife environment? Some mystical traditions affirm this, suggesting that positive energy directed toward the deceased can ease their transitions or lift them from lower vibrational states. Others caution that clinging too tightly can hold a soul back, binding it to earthly attachments. All these considerations reinforce that death is not just an event for the person dying. It's also a communal pivot point that touches families, friends, and entire communities. The possibility that the departed continues in awareness adds another dimension of meaning to grief, one that can transform bereavement from an experience of sheer finality to one of eventual reunion or ongoing connection. Whether viewed as literal truth or healing metaphor, it offers a path for channeling sorrow into compassion and renewal for both the living and the departed. The bridging of science and spirituality around death and consciousness has become increasingly prominent, especially with the advent of more sophisticated research methodology. Traditionally, science took a firm and materialistic stance. Once the brain stops functioning, consciousness extinguishes. However, a growing number of studies in fields like parapsychology, transpersonal psychology, and even mainstream medical research on near-death experiences have introduced data points that challenge this assumption. For instance, well-documented cases exist of individuals who accurately report verifiable details they should have had no way of perceiving given their clinically dead state. Dr. Raymond Moody's seminal work, Life After Life, brought the phrase near-death experience into popular culture. Since then, researchers such as Dr. Bruce Grayson, Dr. Kenneth Ring, and Dr. Pim van Lommel have gathered thousands of NDE accounts with striking similarities, reports of a tunnel, a bright light, a sense of overwhelming love, and of course, the life review. Additionally, organizations like the International Association for Near-Death Studies, INS, offer forums for sharing and analyzing these phenomena. This body of research does not conclusively prove life after death. Scientific rigor insists that correlation does not equal causation, but it does suggest that the consciousness lives on hypothesis remains plausible enough to warrant deeper investigation. Critics maintain alternative explanations. The vivid perceptions might be illusions triggered by an oxygen-deprived brain or the release of certain neurochemicals such as endorphins or DMT in extreme states. Yet none of these purely physiological models convincingly account for cases where individuals glean accurate information that they could not have otherwise known. Nor do they explain the permanent changes in personality, outlook, and values that so many experiences exhibit upon recovery. If it were merely a hallucination, why would it so frequently result in profound positive transformations that align with spiritual principles like unconditional love and forgiveness? Another angle involves quantum theory, with researchers like physicist Dr. Amit Goswami proposing that consciousness is fundamental to reality, not merely a product of matter. Though many quantum physicists caution against conflating quantum phenomena with spirituality, the mere fact that consciousness and observation play mysterious roles in quantum mechanics piques curiosity. Could the same rules that govern subatomic particles hint at a reality where consciousness persists beyond physical form? The question remains open, as the mainstream science has not yet reached a consensus. Nevertheless, the intersection of science and spirituality in NDE research is reminiscent of a centuries-old conversation. Are we at our core spiritual beings having a human experience, or are we biological machines with a persistent illusion of soul? The data from NDEs, while not unanimously accepted, continues to keep this debate alive. Future advancements in neurology, artificial intelligence, and consciousness studies may shed more light on these matters. In the meantime, those who have peered beyond the veil often return to share stories that converge remarkably with the ancient teachings we've been exploring. That the final breath is a threshold, not an ending, and that what lies beyond might be more real than the fleeting world we currently inhabit. One aspect of near-death and after-death accounts that often fascinates researchers is the presence, or at least the perceived presence, of loved ones who have already passed on. Many experiencers report being greeted by relatives, close friends, or even cherished pets in the transitional realms. These reunions are typically described as joyous and comforting, marked by an emotional warmth that transcends everyday interactions. While it's plausible to argue that this could be a psychological coping mechanism or a projection of deep yearning, the consistency of these reports across cultures and time periods is notable. In Haitian Vodou, the spirits of ancestors, the Gede, are considered active participants in the community's spiritual life, guiding and sometimes even possessing living family members during rituals. Similarly, many indigenous cultures maintain that ancestral spirits watch over the living, offering protection and counsel. The Greek philosopher Plato wrote about a realm of forms that transcends the tangible world, suggesting a continuity of being where souls intermingle. If these glimpses of the departed in near-death states are more than mere dreams, they might point to a wellspring of ancestral presence that remains accessible in some subtle dimension of existence. Such descriptions challenge the Western modern notion that once someone has died, they cease to be reachable. Instead, they propose a relational continuum where bonds formed in life persist beyond physical separation. It aligns with the concept of soul families, or soul groups, beings that incarnate together repeatedly to assist one another's growth. In near-death reports, the sense of being welcomed by familiar faces sometimes includes the revelation that certain souls have played multiple roles in multiple lifetimes, highlighting the cyclical and intertwined nature of our journeys. Even those who did not believe in an afterlife prior to an NDE often emerge convinced that there's an ongoing tapestry of relationships beyond mortal confines. Skeptics might point to cultural conditioning. If someone expects to see departed relatives, the mind might create that experience as a comforting hallucination. Yet there are documented instances of people encountering individuals they did not know were deceased at the time, only to discover later that the person had indeed died. These situations, although anecdotal, strengthen the case for something more profound than purely internal mind states. They also resonate with the broader tapestry of apparitional experiences, where living individuals report visits or messages from the newly dead, often spanning thousands of recorded cases in psychical research. From a therapeutic standpoint, the notion that we might reunite with loved ones can be deeply healing for those facing terminal illnesses or coping with grief. While it doesn't negate the pain of loss, it reframes death as a temporary separation rather than an absolute severing. For those left behind, it can provide hope, albeit one grounded in experiences that remain scientifically controversial. Yet for the experiencers themselves, these encounters often serve as some of the most convincing aspects of the journey. The feeling of being recognized and loved in a realm beyond the physical can validate the core idea that consciousness and relationships persist, weaving through multiple layers of existence in ways we're only beginning to understand. Moving deeper into the psychological dimension, we discover that encounters with frightening or distressing scenarios in NDEs, though less common than the radiant positive stories, equally instructive. Some individuals report passing through dark tunnels filled with dissonant sounds or encountering grotesque figures seemingly bent on torment. Others describe states of profound loneliness or despair, sometimes interpreted as hellish. Intriguingly, those who eventually move past these distressing scenes often do so by invoking love, forgiveness, or a spiritual guide. The environment then shifts almost as though it is responding to a change in their emotional frequency. Such accounts align with the idea found in Tibetan Buddhism and other esoteric schools that negative post-death experiences stem from unresolved traumas, intense fears, or unhealed anger. The so-called wrathful deities in Tibetan Bardo texts can be understood as projections of one's own unintegrated psyche. If recognized as illusory manifestations or met with compassion, they can transform, revealing their underlying benevolent nature. This principle suggests that if we carry heavy emotional baggage, we risk encountering it magnified once we're freed from the body's filters. Psychiatrists who study NDEs, such as Dr. Bruce Grayson, note that even individuals who experience a terrifying near-death journey often come back with a renewed commitment to emotional healing. They recognize that their own unresolved issues played a role in shaping that dark experience. While it might be tempting to label these phenomena as hallucinations, the transformative impact they have on people's lives afterwards points to a deeper psychological or spiritual mechanism. One might think of it as the mind's final attempt to confront and purge hidden fears. In a sense, it parallels the concept of shadow work in psychology, facing and integrating our darkest aspects to become whole. It's worth adding that the shift from fear to love, from chaos to peace, often happens once the individual surrenders. In these frightening near-death episodes, the moment of genuine surrender, acknowledging a higher power or invoking forgiveness, can catalyze an immediate change in the environment. This underscores a principle repeated in many spiritual teachings. Our internal state profoundly influences our external or perceived reality. If we accept that consciousness continues post-breath, the same principle might apply in the bardo or other subtle realms. The emotional quality we hold becomes the lens through which we perceive and therefore co-create our surroundings. While disturbing, these darker NDEs do serve a purpose in the grand mosaic of afterlife narratives. They remind us that the afterlife is not necessarily a guaranteed paradise. Personal responsibility for our inner states remains crucial. This is not the same as a moralistic condemnation. Rather, it highlights the universal law of resonance. We gravitate to experiences that mirror our inner constitution. Just as a radio tunes into the frequency it's set to, consciousness tunes into realities that match its vibrational tone. Thus, the more we integrate our shadow aspects while alive through self-awareness, empathy, and healing, the less likely we'll be trapped in fearful or tormenting mental spaces when the final breath arrives. Beyond the individual's journey, there is also a collective dimension to consider when discussing what happens after death. Many metaphysical and spiritual doctrines propose that entire communities or societies can influence the post-death state through collective belief, ritual, and energy. For example, in certain Taoist practices, the living perform elaborate ceremonies to elevate the souls of the departed, sending merit or virtue to support them in their next phases. In Catholicism, the idea of praying for souls in purgatory is similarly rooted in the belief that collective prayer can ease their purification, hastening their passage into heavenly union. Anthropologists studying indigenous cultures often describe communal death rites that ensure the deceased soul is guided safely back to the ancestral realm. The community may spend days or weeks chanting, dancing, or fasting, creating an energetic bridge between worlds. From a materialistic standpoint, these acts could be labeled as mere superstition. But for those within these cultures, they represent a tangible, almost contractual relationship between the living and the departed. The emotional or spiritual well-being of the groups is intertwined with the peaceful transition of its members. Interestingly, the notion of ghosts or restless spirits is sometimes explained as souls who have not received the proper communal send-off, or who remain tethered by guilt, vengeance, or deep grief. In folklore worldwide, such spirits wander the boundaries of human habitation, occasionally manifesting to the living. While Hollywood sensationalizes these appearances, older traditions often approach them more sympathetically, seeking to help the spirit find resolution or healing. This can involve ceremonies like burning symbolic paper items in Chinese customs or seeking the intercession of saints in Christian communities. Modern Western societies, which often lack cohesive communal rituals around death, are seeing a resurgence of interest in practices like home vigils, eco-friendly burials, and personalized commemorations. Some families opt for more participatory funerals, where loved ones can speak directly to the departed, light candles, or perform small rites that they believe help release the soul. These practices could be interpreted psychologically as ways for the living to cope, but within a broader spiritual framework, they might also be channels for genuine energetic support to the newly departed. From a near-death experience standpoint, some individuals who have come back mention seeing luminous forms of collective prayer surrounding them, or sensing the thoughts of concern and love from distant family members. This raises a provocative question. If collective human intention can be felt by those on the brink, might it also be felt by those who fully cross over numerous mystical traditions? Say yes, asserting that heartfelt prayer or focused intention has no spatial or temporal limitations. For them, the interplay between personal and collective consciousness forms a web of interconnected energies. Therefore, how we as a community treat death and how we uphold or ignore afterlife possibilities could have a real impact, not just psychologically, but in the actual after-death trajectories of souls. At this juncture, it's worth exploring how these insights into death and the afterlife might reshape our understanding of ethics, morality, and everyday decision-making. If indeed our inner state and intentions follow us beyond the physical realm, morality ceases to be just a social construct or religious edict. Instead, it becomes an extension of self-care and cosmic harmony. Actions driven by malicious intent or deep-seated selfishness aren't simply wrong in an abstract sense. They actively create states of suffering that we'll eventually face either in this life or the next transitional phase. In this light, the emphasis shifts from fearing external judgment to understanding the self-imposed consequences of our own energies. The life review, as we've discussed, teaches that every action ripples outwards and returns to us in some form of felt experience. This principle resonates with the concept of karma. In Eastern traditions, it's not so much a ledger of crimes and punishments, but a universal law of balance and learning. The soul in such a universe is motivated to cultivate virtues, compassion, honesty, kindness, because these states align it with harmonious frequencies that make for a more enlightened and liberating passage, both in life and after death. Interestingly, this perspective also enhances our capacity for forgiveness. If someone harms us, it doesn't mean we approve of their actions, but we might recognize that they are creating future burdens for themselves. From the vantage of near-death experiences, which consistently portray an ultimate unity of consciousness, harming another is akin to harming oneself. This view doesn't eliminate the need for accountability or boundaries, but frames justice in a broader cosmic perspective. Punitive measures might deter harmful behavior temporarily, but true reparation happens when the individual or soul confronts the ripples of their actions in the life review or bardo states. Likewise, the idea that our consciousness shapes post-death realities offers a nuanced lens on mental health. Emotional pain trauma and destructive impulses could manifest in challenging afterlife scenarios unless addressed here and now. This might sound daunting, but it actually highlights the therapeutic value of inner work. By engaging in therapy, meditation, and other healing modalities, we're not just improving this life. We may be paving the way for a more luminous transition. Consequently, mental health becomes a cornerstone of spiritual well-being, bridging the gap between psychology and metaphysics. The altruism that arises from near-death experiences, where many return to engage in humanitarian or healing activities, also underlines this moral shift. Once a person has felt the tangible interconnection of souls, it's nearly impossible to revert to a purely self-centered outlook. This spiritual impetus, grounded in the direct encounter with unity and accountability, offers a potent antidote to nihilism and apathy. It reaffirms the inherent value of every being's journey, suggesting that every small gesture of kindness or cruelty holds weight in the grand tapestry of existence. In short, if the final breath truly leads to a realm reflective of our inner condition, then the moral imperative to cultivate goodness and clarity becomes a logical, even self-evident choice. Another dimension worth exploring is the interface between mystical experiences in life, such as profound meditative states or psychedelic journeys, and the descriptions of after-death realms. Many individuals who have practiced deep meditation or used entheogenic substances like psilocybin or DMT have reported experiences strikingly similar to accounts of the bardo or near-death passages. These can include dissolving into light, witnessing one's life from a detached vantage, encountering beings of immense love and intelligence, or confronting personal demons that dissolve upon recognition. In some indigenous cultures, the use of visionary plants like ayahuasca or peyote is explicitly tied to an understanding of death and rebirth. The ritual frameworks around these substances often emphasize purification, setting a clear intention, and surrendering to a guided journey, paralleling what various traditions suggest the soul should do after bodily death. Shamans may act as psychopomps, not only guiding participants through the visionary experience, but also preparing them for the eventual crossing into the spirit world. Here, the boundaries between life ceremony and afterlife education blur, pointing to a universal human quest to understand and rehearse for what lies beyond. Researchers studying psychedelics in clinical settings such as Johns Hopkins University and Imperial College London note that high-dose experiences sometimes induce mystical-type episodes. Participants often describe encountering a radiant presence or gaining insights that reshape their understanding of mortality and the interconnectedness of life. Like near-death experiences, many of these individuals emerge with less fear of death and a more altruistic mindset. While mainstream science is still cautious about drawing conclusions, the parallels are hard to ignore. Could these medicines be offering a temporary glimpse of the same spaces or states of consciousness that open up permanently when we die? It's a controversial notion, yet it resonates with ancient religious ideas that certain substances can part the veil between worlds. The Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece, for instance, reportedly used a potent brew to induce visions that convinced initiates of the soul's immortality. Modern theories suggest this brew might have contained ergot derivatives, precursors to LSD. Whether or not these experiences literally replicate the after-death journey, they often produce revelations about the nature of consciousness, dissolving the fear of non-existence. For those uninterested in or wary of psychoactive exploration, meditation offers another pathway. Advanced meditators in Buddhist, Hindu, and Christian monastic traditions describe states of samadhi, or union with the divine, that echo afterlife, narratives of profound oneness, the cessation of the ordinary ego, and direct contact with a boundless presence. Some Tibetan yogis train specifically in dream yoga or Fo-Wa, the practice of conscious dying, aiming to maintain awareness during the death process and thus steer the post-death experience more skillfully. All these convergences suggest that the boundary between life and afterlife might be more permeable than we think. It's as though glimpses of the next reality seep into this one through special circumstances, be it meditation, near-death crises, or carefully guided visionary states. They hint that preparing for death is essentially about cultivating a refined awareness of consciousness itself, learning to navigate its many layers with clarity and courage. Given these vast intersections, cultural rituals, science, psychedelics, moral philosophy, one might wonder how our understanding of death could evolve in the coming decade. Recent generations have already seen a shift in attitudes. The hospice movement has grown, bringing death out of sterile hospital wards and into more compassionate, home-like environments. Death cafes have sprung up in many cities where people gather informally to talk about mortality over coffee and cake, normalizing discussions once relegated to hushed whispers. There's also an increased interest in green burials, which emphasize a return to the earth without embalming or elaborate caskets. Such changes, though small on a global scale, signal a renewed openness to the spiritual and existential dimensions of dying. This cultural turn may in part be fueled by the proliferation of near-death experience literature and documentaries, as well as the growth of interfaith dialogue. In a globalized world, people are exposed to multiple belief systems which can catalyze curiosity about how different traditions interpret the final breath. The more we cross-pollinate these ideas, the more we realize that a rigid materialistic view of death is but one perspective among many, albeit a dominant one in Western mainstream thought. Technological developments could also shape our evolving narrative about death. Artificial intelligence and virtual reality might eventually offer immersive simulations of afterlife scenarios based on aggregated near-death testimonies, letting users explore these realms digitally. While no simulation can truly replicate a transcendent state, such tools might serve as powerful thought experiments, prompting us to question how consciousness might persist outside a biological framework. Parallel to this, advances in cryonics and transhumanist ideas about uploading human consciousness into computers pose entirely different questions. If we could somehow preserve or emulate a person's mind indefinitely, would that constitute immortality, or is consciousness tied to a spiritual essence that cannot be digitized? Near-death experience, research would suggest that digital immortality falls short of capturing the complete reality of being a reality that includes subtle, non-physical dimensions. Yet the conversation itself may spark more intense inquiry into what consciousness actually is and whether it fundamentally transcends material substrates. In many ways, we are at a threshold akin to the transitional space described in Bardo teachings. As a society, we stand between older paradigms that saw death as a taboo or final nothingness, and emerging paradigms that view it as a doorway into expansive states of awareness. Science, spirituality, and cultural practices are converging in new ways, offering us glimpses that this threshold might be less forbidding and more integral to the human journey. If the future fosters open-minded exploration without dogmatic clinging either to strict materialism or uncritical mysticism, we may find ourselves better equipped to face mortality with courage, wisdom, and even a sense of sacred curiosity. Amid all these evolving viewpoints, an underlying thread persists: the emphasis on direct experience. Ancient shamans, Tibetan lamas, Christian mystics, Hindu sadhus, and modern near-death survivors share a common methodology. They speak from lived encounters rather than second-hand theories. Whether through ritual meditation, prayer, or an unplanned brush with death, they point to experiences that transcend the intellectual. And while doctrines, scriptures, and scholarly analyses hold value, there's a universal recognition that no amount of study can replace the epiphany that arises when one actually touches the afterlife, if only briefly. This emphasis on direct experience challenges us to be both courageous and humble. Courageous because it asks us to open ourselves to the unknown, to face the possibility that we might dissolve into a greater oneness or confront inner demons magnified tenfold. Humble because each new insight reveals how little we truly understand about the nature of reality. Even near-death experiencers who return with vivid memories often struggle to convey the profundity of what they encountered. Words, images, and analogies fall short when describing states that lie outside normal cognitive frameworks. Nevertheless, the attempt to articulate these experiences remains important. Human culture has always relied on storytellers, whether they be shamans, poets, or scientists, to bridge the gap between the ineffable and the communal sphere. In telling their stories, near-death experiencers remind us that the boundary between life and death might be thinner than we believe. Their accounts echo ancient texts that speak of luminous realms, karmic consequences, benevolent guides, and a cosmic intelligence that seems to cradle every soul. Such narratives can also act as catalysts for personal transformation. Those who read them might find the inspiration to heal old wounds, forgive adversaries, or rekindle a sense of purpose. The possibility that death is not the end, but a passage, can provide a renewed appreciation for life, paradoxically encouraging us to live more vibrantly in the here and now. It can also evoke a sense of responsibility if we are indeed stewards of our consciousness beyond the physical realm, then cultivating a loving, clear and balanced mindset becomes an ethical imperative. Moreover, direct spiritual experiences are unlimited to near-death events. Many individuals report mystical moments during prayer while gazing at the night sky or even in the midst of grief. These flashes of transcendence may not always come with elaborate visions, but they often carry the same core message: there is more to our identity than the ego or the body. Tapping into that more can imbue our human endeavors with a quality of reverence and wonder. So even without a dramatic NDE, one can cultivate practices that gently erode the veil between seen and unseen. Regular contemplation of impermanence, acts of selfless service, immersion in nature, or deep meditative inquiry can all yield glimpses of the vast reality that near-death experiencers describe so passionately. Ultimately, the impetus is not just to believe in something, but to explore it, to step into the unknown, guided by sincerity, and a longing to discover for oneself the truths that lie just beyond the final breath. When discussing the continuity of consciousness past bodily death, one might naturally wonder about the role of memory. Will we remember our earthly lives? Will we retain our personal identities? The afterlife accounts we've touched upon provide varied answers. Some individuals in near-death states claim a crystal-clear recollection of their life events, often more vivid than they experienced them in life. Others speak of receiving knowledge that transcends their personal biography, as though they momentarily merged with the universal mind where all memories are stored. Yet certain traditions suggest that eventually personal memories may dissolve if we progress far enough along the path toward unity. In advanced states of spiritual realization, such as nirvikalpa samadhi in Hinduism, or the cloud of unknowing in Christian mysticism, the sense of an individual self with its unique story fades into the background. This raises questions about whether the dissolution of self is the ultimate spiritual goal or just one potential outcome. Near-death experiencers sometimes describe a transitional phase. At first they remember who they were on Earth, but as they move closer to the unitive light, they care less about personal identity. The love and insight they feel eclipse the need to cling to an ego-based narrative. In the Tibetan Buddhist view, the alaya vijnana, storehouse consciousness, retains the karmic seeds of past lives, shaping the next incarnation. Memories at a surface level may not carry over, but the deeper imprints do. Similarly, the Christian idea of a final resurrection and judgment implies some continuity of self, albeit transformed by divine presence. This is why certain visions depict the deceased recognizing each other in heavenly realms. Recognition points to the survival of personal traits or soul signatures, at least for a time. For those who worry about losing cherished memories or relationships, it might be more reassuring to think of a gradual process. As described by many afterlife travelers, the first steps beyond the body often involve a thorough recollection of earthly life, the well-known life review. It's only in higher or more expansive stages that personal identity might melt into something more universal. Alternatively, some esoteric sources claim that souls can choose whether to retain or release aspects of their individuality. They might decide to remain accessible as guides or guardians to loved ones, preserving enough of their personality to be recognizable even while existing predominantly in subtler realms. All of these viewpoints reflect a nuanced tapestry. Memory identity and unity are not mutually exclusive, but exist along a spectrum. The soul can shift between them depending on its level of awareness and its divine purpose. As with much in the realm of post-death speculation, clarity only comes with direct experience, one that presumably we all eventually have. In the meantime, these accounts, both ancient and modern, can help us frame our questions and perhaps ease the fear that we'll simply disappear. They hint at a continuity of love and recognition that outlasts the physical senses, balanced by an invitation to grow beyond our familiar boundaries into an all-encompassing presence. Bringing the conversation closer to home, we might ask how to integrate this wealth of afterlife insight into our everyday routines beyond just relieving the fear of death. For starters, the concept of a life review can act as a powerful motivator for ethical living. Imagine, for instance, pausing each evening to reflect on the day's interactions. Did I speak from love or from fear? Did I uplift or wound someone? Such reflection isn't meant to induce guilt, but to foster awareness. Over time, it attunes us to the fact that every moment is a seed that may bloom in future life, refuse near-death experiences, or in the subtle realms beyond. Another practical application is to cultivate what some might call a bardo mindset while still alive. The bardo in Tibetan teachings is that in-between state after death, where mind-generated illusions can appear overwhelmingly real. But if we pay attention, life itself is full of illusions, projections of our fears, desires, and preconceived notions. Recognizing illusions in everyday scenarios, like misjudgments about people's motives or distortions about our self-worth, can sharpen our capacity to discern truth. This skill could prove invaluable if upon death we're greeted by mind-made landscapes. By practicing discernment now, we lay the groundwork for clarity later. Furthermore, these teachings suggest an approach to relationships rooted in kindness and forgiveness. If, as near-death experiences claim, we'll one day feel the impact of our actions through others' perspectives, then nurturing empathy becomes not just a moral, but a deeply pragmatic choice. Daily meditation on compassion, like the Buddhist practice of metta or loving kindness, trains the mind to default to empathy rather than judgment. This not only improves our social bonds, but according to many spiritual traditions, shapes a gentler transition at the time of death. On a broader scale, contemplating afterlife possibilities can inspire a re-evaluation of life goals. Material success, while comfortable, might seem less urgent if we suspect that love, growth, and service hold more enduring significance. We might invest more in experiences that nourish the heart and spirit, such as community building, artistic creation, or simply spending quality time with those we cherish. By shifting priorities, we begin living in a manner consistent with the expanded awareness that near-death survivors speak of effectively weaving small pieces of that luminous realm into our worldly landscape. Lastly, these insights can foster a sense of wonder, the possibility that our consciousness continues, that we might meet luminous guides, or that our life's smallest acts radiate through cosmic ripples. This can instill life with a sacred dimension. Far from diminishing the urgency of our earthly tasks, it highlights the extraordinary significance of each choice. we become mindful that in the tapestry of existence, every thread matters, both for who we are now and for the soul we are becoming in life and in the great beyond. Ultimately, the discussions woven throughout parts 1 and 2 point toward a single unifying theme that death is less an end point and more a transformation, and that our consciousness is poised to continue its explorations in realms beyond our familiar physical world. We've examined historical and cross-cultural parallels, the phenomenon of near-death experiences, possible scientific interplays, and the deeply personal ways these insights can reshape our ethics communities and personal journeys. What emerges is a grand mosaic illustrating that every tradition in its own language attempts to describe the indescribable, the continuity of being. When the final breath leaves our lungs, if these accounts hold any truth, we do not vanish. Rather, we expand, stepping into a panorama of heightened awareness, unconditional love, or for some challenges that reflect unhealed parts of our psyche. Either way, the journey continues, inviting us to grow, reconcile, and perhaps eventually dissolve into a unity that transcends all notions of individuality. Yet at the heart of this tapestry, there is also an important caveat: no description, however detailed, can substitute for direct experience. Doctrines, testimonies, and philosophical discourses serve as pointers, not proofs. It's wise to remain open-minded, grounded in humility about the limits of our current understanding. Even as we glean insights from the resonances between ancient texts and modern narratives, the full reality of what happens after death remains a sacred mystery, one that each of us will one day meet face to face. And so we stand at the threshold, equipped with glimpses and signposts. We can choose to incorporate these themes into our lives, seeing every encounter, every emotion, and every intention as part of a grander tapestry that extends past the horizon of mortality. Or we can dismiss them, adhering strictly to the materialist perspective that consciousness is a fleeting epiphenomenon of the brain. The choice, like much in life, is deeply personal. But the consistent message from those who have stepped briefly over the edge is that life is far richer, more purposeful, and more interconnected than we often imagine. If there is any overarching invitation in these discussions, it's this: live now as though life continues after death. Cultivate the inner qualities you would want to carry into the next chapter. Keep your heart open to the possibility that love itself is the fundamental fabric of reality, one that binds us across lifetimes and dimensions. Whether or not we accept these possibilities as literal truth, living by them can bring a sense of meaning, reduce existential anxiety, and widen our capacity for compassion. In preparing for Part 3, we'll synthesize these themes further, exploring advanced considerations, the nuances of choosing rebirth or release, and the possible roles we might play in guiding others or being guided ourselves once we leave this world behind. We'll also circle back to the ultimate questions of whether there is a conclusion to this cosmic journey, or if, in some grand paradox, every ending is but another beginning. As we embark on our final section of this extensive exploration, it might be helpful to revisit some core premises. Thus far, we've examined the possibility that death is not the end of consciousness, but rather a pivotal passage into expanded realities, realities that may feel more immediate, vivid, and responsive than our ordinary waking life. We've discovered accounts suggesting that these realms are shaped by our inner world. Our intentions, attachments, and capacity to love become the architecture of our post-death environment. We've heard testimonies of gentle beckonings into tunnels of light, comprehensive life reviews, serene encounters with guiding presences, and even challenging forays into fear-laden or isolating domains. Our inquiry has also revealed how universal the theme of continuity is threading through cultures as diverse as ancient Egypt and modern-day America, from Tibetan lamas to hospice nurses. Philosophical debates, religious teachings, and scientific studies converge on the idea that something, call it soul awareness or consciousness, persists beyond the final exhale. We see that people who have temporarily crossed that threshold frequently describe it as a homecoming to a reality more authentic than the one we inhabit in bodily form. This invites a profound re-evaluation of how we define life in the first place. So, where do we go from here? After all, even if these glimpses suggest that death is a portal, there remain countless mysteries. Some revolve around the soul's choice after death to reincarnate, linger in intermediate realms, or move into a more permanent unity with the source. Others delve into the question of whether souls can become helpers or guides for those still living. There's also a dimension of practical application. How do we, here and now, use this knowledge to live more wisely, foster compassion, and prepare for our own eventual transition? In this final section, we'll synthesize advanced considerations and address the nuanced paths that souls might follow once free from the physical form. Some traditions speak of returning to earthly life voluntarily, much like the bodhisattvas of Buddhist lore, out of compassion for those still enmeshed in suffering. Others highlight the possibility of remaining in luminous realms, aiding humanity through subtle inspiration rather than physical embodiment. There's also the ultimate notion of dissolving personal identity, entirely merging with what many call the divine God or source. This state is variously referred to as moksha nirvana phana, or mystical union, and it suggests a radical departure from our usual sense of individuality. In approaching these themes, we should keep in mind that no single path is universally prescribed. Indeed, near-death experiences, spiritual texts, and esoteric commentaries all emphasize that each soul's journey is unique, shaped by its own readiness, attachments, and aspirations. While overarching patterns exist, such as life reviews and luminous encounters, the precise details vary, pointing to a fluid cosmos that respects free will growth and the enduring spark of individuality, or the choice to transcend it. As we proceed, let us remain open to the possibility that all these scenarios could be valid simultaneously in a reality grander than our logical minds can wholly grasp. A concept that appears repeatedly in esoteric teachings is that of soul contracts or pre-birth plans. According to this view, souls prior to incarnating collaborate with guides or higher aspects of themselves to chart certain experiences that will facilitate growth. This might involve choosing particular parents, geographical locations, or even major life challenges, trauma, illness, or heartbreak that will spark the lessons the soul intends to master. While this notion is sometimes conflated with a deterministic worldview where everything is preordained, most advocates of soul contract theory stress that free will still operates. The soul sets the curriculum, but how one navigates it remains a matter of choice. How does this tie into what happens after death? Many near-death experiences report that during their in-between state, they recall a sense of agreement, like I signed up for these lessons. They might see a tapestry or blueprint depicting their life challenges as opportunities for expansion rather than as punishments. This can be incredibly liberating, transforming anger at life's hardships into a realization of purpose. Some individuals recount encounters with a council of elders or wise beings who gently but firmly help them review whether they have fulfilled their chosen objectives or whether they might benefit from returning for another round in the physical dimension. If we entertain this perspective, the after-death journey involves reassessing these soul contracts. Did we gather the intended wisdom? Did we deviate from our path in ways that necessitate revisiting particular circumstances? The life review, then, is not merely about moral judgments, but about checking alignment with our own higher plan. It's a deeply personal conversation between one's incarnate self and the broader oversoul, or higher self, that never left the realm of unity. In this sense, we encounter a gracious cosmic system, one that provides multiple lifetimes, multiple vantage points, and countless angles through which to learn the essential lessons of love, compassion, courage, and creativity. In many Eastern traditions, especially Hinduism and Buddhism, this aligns with the concept of karma, not as a punitive mechanism, but as a system of cause and effect that drives soul evolution. Each action, intention, or thought deposits a karmic seed in the storehouse consciousness. After death, these seeds determine the quality of experiences that unfold, either leading the soul toward beneficial realms or binding it to less harmonious ones. Even so, our karma is malleable. The conscious transformation of heart and mind can burn away accumulated negativity. And in the bardo states described by Tibetan texts, a moment of profound recognition or realization can dramatically alter one's trajectory. Therefore, when a soul crosses that boundary of physical death, it may find itself drawn to the next set of circumstances, be they incarnational or otherwise, that resonate with its vibrational profile. This is not fate, it's resonance. If the soul radiates fear and attachment, it gravitates towards scenarios that mirror those frequencies. If it pulses with compassion and clarity, it finds itself in luminous domains or chooses to return and serve. Soul contracts in this vision are less about rigid destiny and more about an intricate dance between aspiration and free will played out on the grand stage of cosmic evolution. Within certain spiritual lineages, the notion of voluntary return, much like the bodhisattva ideal, lies at the heart of their teachings. Bodhisattvas in Mahayana Buddhism are enlightened beings who could merge fully with the blissful state of nirvana, yet decide to reincarnate or remain accessible to guide others. This isn't an act of martyrdom, but rather a demonstration of compassion so vast that personal liberation is willingly postponed until all beings can be freed from suffering. Analogues to this concept can be found in other traditions, Christian saints who choose to intercede from celestial realms, or Sufi masters who remain spiritually present after death to assist devotees. In near-death narratives, some individuals describe being given a choice: remain in the luminous realm or return to the body. The deciding factor often revolves around love for a child not yet raised, love for a spouse who needs support, or an unfinished mission that resonates powerfully within the soul. These people return with an elevated sense of purpose, often channeling that renewed vigor into healing work, philanthropy, or spiritual teaching. They embody in a smaller scale way the principle of the bodhisattva, returning not because the physical realm is more appealing, but because there is a compassionate drive to assist. This theme becomes even more multifaceted when we consider advanced beings who, according to esoteric sources, no longer need to incarnate for their own evolution, but do so solely for the benefit of others. Sometimes referred to as returners tulkus or avatars, these souls allegedly carry higher wisdom into human birth to uplift collective consciousness. The Dalai Lama, for instance, is venerated by Tibetan Buddhists as a tulku, a conscious reincarnation of a compassionate lineage. In Hinduism, the tradition of avatars like Krishna and Rama suggests that divine consciousness periodically manifests on Earth to restore balance. From a Western esoteric standpoint, the notion of ascended masters emerges. Figures like Saint-Germain or Kuthumi are said to have transcended the cycle of rebirth, but remain available to guide humanity through subtle inspiration. Their existence, while unproven by conventional science, features prominently in certain theosophical and New Age circles. Whether one views these narratives literally or symbolically, they reinforce a consistent motif. Spiritual progress does not necessarily culminate in leaving the world behind. It can also manifest as an ongoing commitment to serve others from a state of expanded consciousness. For the everyday seeker, these ideas hint at a possibility. The impetus for returning after death might not always be karmic compulsion. It could stem from a sincere wish to learn more or to help others awaken. The radical compassion described in these accounts challenges the assumption that personal enlightenment must be the sole end goal. Instead, the journey becomes about weaving personal liberation with collective upliftment. Even if we're far from embodying that level of selflessness, the mere awareness that such a path exists can inspire a more compassionate outlook, both in how we live and how we might relate to the possibility of returning after death. Yet another intriguing avenue is the idea of guides, both receiving guidance and becoming guides ourselves once we pass on. It's commonplace in near-death experiences for individuals to encounter a being of light or an entity that radiates acceptance and love. Sometimes these guides are experienced as angels' ancestors or beloved deities from one's religious background. In other instances, they defy simple categorization, appearing more like personifications of wisdom that transcend cultural labels. Regardless of the form they take, their role is almost always one of gentleness and reassurance, helping the newly departed soul to acclimate and learn. In Christian mysticism, one might speak of a guardian angel. In Hindu thought, it could be an aspect of Ishvara, or a personal deity like Krishna guiding the devotee across the threshold. In secular contexts, near-death experiences might describe them simply as beings of light offering telepathic communion. The question arises, are these separate consciousnesses or projected aspects of our own higher self? Many teachings propose that they can be both simultaneously. Just as a skilled teacher in life might reflect a student's innate wisdom, so these guides could be external expressions of the cosmic love that dwells within every soul. In turn, there's also the possibility that we, once we transition, can evolve into guides for others. This idea resonates strongly in indigenous beliefs, where ancestors remain actively involved in the community's well-being. The barrier between living and dead is porous, allowing shamans or medicine people to commune with ancestral spirits for counsel and healing. In spiritualist traditions, mediums claim to channel messages from deceased loved ones who have taken on supportive roles for those still on Earth. While mainstream skepticism remains, such practices highlight a widespread intuition that death does not sever the bonds of care and guidance. From a developmental perspective, a soul that has amassed wisdom through numerous lifetimes might naturally step into a guiding role akin to a mentor who has progressed far enough along the path to offer counsel to those just beginning. The spirit guide phenomenon, popular in certain New Age circles, usually emphasizes that such guides respect free will. They offer suggestions but do not intrude on one's autonomy. This principle echoes throughout many after-death accounts. Even the most luminous presence rarely commands. It invites reflecting the the spiritual law that genuine growth arises from inner realization rather than external coercion. For those curious about cultivating a relationship with these guiding forces while still alive, meditative practices across cultures often involve prayer, invocation, or visualization, extending an intentional call for higher guidance. Whether or not we literally connect with a discrete being, the process can activate dormant parts of our psyche that hold deeper insight. In essence, it parallels how creative individuals sometimes say their best ideas came from somewhere beyond themselves. Thus, the concept of guides underscores a central theme of our exploration. We exist within a network of interwoven consciousness, and learning to navigate that network may be one of our primary tasks, both in life and after death. In discussing merging with the Source, we enter some of the most profound yet elusive territory described by mystics and advanced near-death experiences alike. Terms like nirvana, moksha, fana, and theosis point to a state where the ego dissolves into the divine, experiencing an all-encompassing unity. These are not mere metaphors for moral goodness. They signify a radical shift in identity from being a separate self to being the one. People who have tasted even a fraction of this union describe it as indescribable, a complete immersion in love, infinite intelligence, and timeless presence. The tricky part is that language inevitably falls short when trying to capture this experience. Words like union and oneness might mislead us into thinking of two entities merging. But the deeper claim is that there is ultimately only one reality, one consciousness from which all individuality arises. We might say a wave recognized it was always the ocean all along. In many accounts, this realization obliterates fear, sorrow, and loneliness, replacing them with an unshakable peace. The Christian mystics sometimes refer to it as divine union, emphasizing the ineffable ecstasy that accompanies the dissolution of the separate self in God. In near-death experiences, glimpses of this unity sometimes come toward the latter stages. People describe traveling deeper into the light, beyond realms of form or personal identity, into a region where distinctions cease. They may sense that they are on the brink of total absorption. Yet in many cases they choose or are guided to return, carrying back the memory that they are fundamentally expressions of a single universal being. In Tibetan Bardo teachings, the clear light that arises at the moment of death offers an instantaneous opportunity for liberation if recognized as our own true nature. Failing to recognize it results in further illusions, leading eventually to rebirth. The decision to remain in that state of unity or to re-emerge into some form of individual identity, be it an afterlife realm or another incarnation, seems to hinge on the soul's readiness and inclinations. Those who are not prepared to relinquish their sense of self may find unity disconcerting or alien. Others who have spent many lifetimes or intense spiritual practice dissolving attachments might merge effortlessly. The process isn't about reward or punishment, but about resonance. If our consciousness vibrates with unity, we flow seamlessly into that ocean. If we still carry attachments, we gravitate to realms that match those attachments. For some, the ultimate union is the completion of a grand cosmic cycle, a final homecoming that dissolves the illusions of time and separateness forever. Others suggest it might not be a one-and-done event, that consciousness could re-emerge again if it chooses, much like how a skilled diver returns to the surface after plumbing the depths. Regardless, the possibility of merging with the source stands as a testament to the boundless potential of consciousness at the core of all these multi-layered journeys through life. death realms, guides, and even reincarnation, there remains a single infinite presence that is our primordial origin and eventual destiny. In modern philosophical discourse, one might frame this conversation around panentheism or non-duality. Panentheism posits that the divine encompasses all creation while also transcending it. Similarly, non-dual teachings in Advaita Vedanta and certain Zen schools assert that there is only consciousness and everything else is a manifestation or appearance within it. When near-death experiencers speak of entering a realm where they and the light are fundamentally one, they echo these ancient philosophical stances. Whether we label it God Brahman or the primordial consciousness, the upshot is that individuality becomes a temporary wave on an endless ocean of being. This realization can shift one's perspective on not just death, but on life's daily dramas. If at the most fundamental level we are expressions of a singular consciousness, then harming others equates to harming ourselves in disguise. Compassion ceases to be a lofty moral duty and becomes a natural expression of seeing the same essence in everyone. This aligns with the testimonies of numerous NDE returnees who experience a deep and lasting shift in their worldview, often accompanied by a sense of universal love and tolerance. Moreover, the concept of non-duality offers a lens for understanding the paradoxical nature of afterlife narratives. How can we talk about traveling guides or life reviews if all is ultimately one? The non-dual reply might be that these phenomena occur within the realm of duality where souls appear distinct. This realm of multiplicity, whether here or in subtle planes, is like a stage upon which cosmic play unfolds. Merging with the source dissolves the stage entirely. Yet so long as we maintain even a shred of individuality, the drama continues. We have scenes, actors, lessons, conflicts, and resolutions. In other words, multiplicity and oneness aren't contradictory realities, but complementary aspects of the same cosmic truth. Near-death experiences that speak of traveling through successive levels of reality, some of which are more transparent to the divine light, could thus be interpreted as an ascent or perhaps an unveiling from denser layers of duality to subtler layers of unity. Each layer could correspond to a lessening of ego boundaries, culminating in the total dissolution at the peak of the journey. This resonates with mystical frameworks from Kabbalah to Sufism, where one ascends through spheres or stages, each offering a clearer glimpse of the infinite. From a pragmatic standpoint, recognizing our potential for unity can mitigate existential dread. Many fear death as the cessation of self, but if selfhood itself is recognized as a temporary phenomenon, the fear can recede. Instead, we might approach death with a sense of curiosity and reverence. Will we get a chance to see beyond the egoic filters, to discover that the identity we cherished so dearly is but a flicker of a vast cosmic dance? For those who have had even the slightest taste of this unity, be it through meditation prayer or a near-death brush, there is often a profound reassurance that what lies on the other side is not darkness, but a luminous expanse of unimaginable peace. In light of these expansive possibilities, voluntary returns, guiding roles, or union with the Source, a question arises about the nature of individuality itself. If consciousness can splinter into countless incarnations while remaining essentially, one, does each persona hold unique value, or is it ultimately subsumed into a grand cosmic ocean? Without residue, spiritual traditions differ in their emphases. Some interpret that each lifetime is like a facet on an infinitely large diamond. Others view each incarnation more like a wave that eventually merges back losing its distinct shape once it recedes into the sea. From a near-death experience standpoint, many returnees emphasize that while they felt a powerful sense of unity, they also retained the memory of individuality, at least up to a certain point. Some relate that even in the presence of an overwhelmingly divine love, they knew themselves as me. It's only when they approached or contemplated the full merging that the boundary of me dissolved. This suggests that individuality might function like a localized lens through which the infinite becomes self-aware, tasting the richness of relationships, creativity, and learning on a stage where illusions of separation enable dynamic interaction. In certain esoteric texts, we find the concept of the Oversoul, a larger multi-dimensional consciousness that spawns multiple incarnations. Each incarnation returns home with new experiences and lessons, enriching the Oversoul's total knowledge. Meanwhile, the Oversoul exists beyond ordinary space-time, orchestrating these dramas across various epochs, or even multiple physical universes. When a particular lifetime ends, it reabsorbs the essence of that incarnation, but the unique vantage point remains as part of the Oversoul's expanded identity. In other words, you as a human identity might dissolve, but the lessons, energies, and love you cultivated remain woven into the greater tapestry of your being. Interestingly, individuals who recall past lives, either spontaneously or through hypnosis, sometimes speak of meeting their past personalities in inner visions, as though each incarnation remains an active thread in the Oversoul's tapestry. These glimpses might appear in between-life regressions, a specialized area of hypnotherapy, where people claim to access states between incarnations and consult with guides or counsels. While such therapies remain controversial in mainstream psychology, they underline a recurring theme: the idea that we are multifaceted beings, simultaneously personal and transpersonal, bridging multiple timelines or realities. Philosophically, this can be both humbling and awe-inspiring. It dissolves a narrow sense of self, reminding us that what we consider me is part of a vast continuum, yet it doesn't render individual lives meaningless. Rather, each life is an essential puzzle piece contributing to the Oversoul's and, by extension, the universal consciousness's ever-unfolding exploration. In practical terms, this realization can encourage us to live each day with both seriousness and playfulness. Seriousness, because our choices matter deeply for our soul's evolution, and playfulness, because in the grand scheme we are also ephemeral explorer. Each cameo in the cosmic theater, a fleeting but invaluable spark of self-discovery. When we combine these themes, Oversouls, unity, individuality, and the laws of cause and effect, we arrive at an overarching principle often described as evolutionary spirituality. This framework proposes that consciousness is continuously evolving not just on the physical plane, but across all dimensions of existence. Each life, each death, each afterlife foray, and each rebirth or choice to remain in the subtle realms contributes to this grand evolutionary arc. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a Jesuit priest and paleontologist, wrote about the Omega Point, a culminating convergence where all of creation is drawn toward higher consciousness. In a different idiom, Sri Aurobindo spoke of the supramental evolution, asserting that human life is a transitional stage toward divine life. Although these thinkers approach the topic from different religious angles, they converge on the idea that existence is purposeful and directional. Death, then, is not a step out of evolution, but a pivot within it, an opportunity for the soul to realign, integrate insights and continue on the spiral of ascension, or choose for compassionate reasons to re-engage with the physical plane. Near-death experience. Research often highlights how profoundly people's lives change after glimpsing what they interpret as advanced realms. They come back less materialistic, more altruistic, and more aware of interconnectedness. Many describe an urgency to share unconditional love, to reduce suffering, and to protect the planet, a shift that resonates with the notion that we are collectively maturing. If the afterlife offers vantage points where the illusions of separateness melt away, then returning to earthly life with that memory can act as a catalyst for social and spiritual transformation. Moreover, evolutionary spirituality asserts that we as a species are on the cusp of greater discoveries about consciousness. Some even hypothesize that future generations will bridge the gap between science and mysticism, enabling more direct exploration of post-death states. Technological tools like brain-machine interfaces might yield new insights into how consciousness detaches or doesn't detach from neural structures. Meanwhile, cross-cultural dialogues about near-death experiences could refine our collective map of the afterlife, dissolving dogmatic barriers that have historically separated major religions. This evolutionary perspective also recasts moral responsibility in a broader light. Rather than being good to earn a place in heaven or avoid punishment, the impetus is to align with the forward thrust of consciousness. Each moment of kindness, creative expression, or spiritual insight contributes to the tapestry of a more awakened humanity, and if we assume reincarnation to the heightened possibilities for our own future incarnations. In effect, growth becomes both an individual and collective enterprise, with death serving as a gateway for recalibration rather than a terminal endpoint. That said, not everyone subscribes to these progressive visions. Some maintain that humanity is entrenched in cycles of ignorance. Yet near-death testimonies consistently emphasize hope. Beneath the surface of personal and societal turmoil, there is an undercurrent of compassion and awakening supported by realms beyond our immediate perception. If we accept that we participate in an evolving cosmos, then what happens after death weaves seamlessly into what happens before birth, forming an unbroken chain of becoming that arcs toward ever-expanding love and awareness. Stepping back into practical terrain, let us consider how an afterlife-informed spirituality might shape end-of-life care in our societies. Traditionally, many Western cultures have handled death in a detached clinical manner, often isolating the dying in hospitals and focusing on prolonging life at any cost. However, a growing death-positive movement advocates for more holistic approaches. Drawing on insights from near-death studies and global spiritual traditions, proponents argue for comprehensive palliative care that addresses emotional, mental, and spiritual needs, not just physical pain management. One promising development is the proliferation of death doulas or end-of-life doulas who support individuals and their families through the dying process. They might facilitate conversations about legacy-guide meditative practices to ease fear or help create rituals that reflect the dying person's spiritual beliefs. These doulas often incorporate the understanding that death may be a threshold, not a finality. By framing dying as a sacred rite of passage rather than a medical failure, they help patients approach their final moments with greater dignity and peace. Hospice programs increasingly welcome discussions about near-death experiences and deathbed visions, even if they cannot scientifically verify them. Recognizing the therapeutic value, nurses and volunteers might encourage patients to share any mystical impressions. In doing so, they provide a safe space for spiritual exploration at a time when individuals may be more receptive to glimpses of other realities. Studies indicate that such integrative care can reduce anxiety, depression, and the sensation of isolation that terminally ill patients often face. Another significant aspect is grief counseling. If a culture acknowledges the possibility of ongoing consciousness, grief can take on a slightly different tone. Rather than exclusively mourning an irreversible absence, loved ones might find solace in the notion of eventual reunion or continued connection. Rituals like lighting candles, writing letters, or even setting up altars for the deceased can help channel grief into a sense of spiritual companionship. While critics might label such practices wishful thinking, countless bereaved individuals report finding genuine comfort and, in some cases, experiences that feel like authentic contact from beyond. Similarly, philanthropic foundations and non-profits dedicated to near-death research and end-of-life support have emerged. They conduct studies, compile case reports, and advocate for more open dialogues about mortality in medical schools and nursing programs. The aim is to ensure that future healthcare professionals can address the spiritual dimension of dying without stigma or dismissal. Of course, these developments are not without controversy. Some fear that an emphasis on afterlife possibilities might discourage scientific inquiry, or that it could open the door to unscrupulous practitioners exploiting vulnerable people. Hence, a balanced approach is crucial, one that remains compassionate and open-minded while also maintaining ethical standards and critical thinking. Yet when done responsibly, weaving afterlife perspectives into end-of-life care can transform a distressing event into a deeply human and even transcendent passage. This shift mirrors the core principle we've encountered repeatedly, the recognition that death, rather than negating life, can be a profound culmination and a gateway to further chapters of conscious existence. Alongside end-of-life care, youth education about mortality remains an underexplored but potentially transformative frontier. Currently, many school curricula either ignore death entirely or discuss it in purely biological terms. A more holistic approach could introduce age-appropriate teachings about the human life cycle, cultural funeral customs, and even basic concepts of consciousness and near-death research. Such an education would not be about indoctrinating children into any single belief system, but about preparing them for an inevitable aspect of life. Imagine a curriculum that, in addition to explaining the physical changes at death, also presents cross-cultural narratives of what might happen afterward. Children could learn about Egyptian burial rites, Tibetan sky burials, Christian notions of heaven, the Day of the Dead in Mexico, and modern NDEs. This comparative exposure fosters respect for different worldviews, reduces the taboo around discussing mortality, and might even spark philosophical curiosity at an early age. Though some parents might object, fearing it could be frightening or confusing, carefully designed programs could address those concerns with sensitivity. Furthermore, children often process death differently from adults. They might have a more intuitive grasp of spiritual concepts or ask questions that unsettle grown-ups. Where did Grandma go? Or will my cat still love me when she's gone? By normalizing discussions of an afterlife without forcing a single dogmatic answer, educators and caregivers can help children navigate grief and existential questions more openly. This can cultivate emotional resilience and a willingness to explore life's mysteries without shame or fear. Teenagers especially can benefit from constructive dialogues about mortality, given that adolescence is a phase of identity formation and existential questioning. Unfortunately, many teens get their information about death from horror movies or sensational media, which often distort or trivialize the experience. Incorporating balanced, thoughtful materials about near-death experiences, empathy, and moral responsibility could counteract some of the more nihilistic or violence glamorizing influences. It might also provide a healthier perspective for youths dealing with depression or suicidal ideation, helping them see that death is not a trivial escape, but a significant transition that deserves respect and understanding. This kind of educational reform is admittedly ambitious. It requires interdisciplinary collaboration among psychologists, theologians, anthropologists, and possibly even near-death researchers. It also calls for educators who are themselves comfortable discussing subjects that many adults avoid. But given the global crises, we face climate change, social unrest, and a collective sense of uncertainty. Empowering younger generations with a broader, more soulful context for life and death might be part of forging a more compassionate future. After all, if tomorrow's leaders grow up unafraid to talk about mortality, they might make decisions that honor the interconnected tapestry of life, guided by a deeper awareness that every life and every death reverberates in the grand continuum of consciousness. In approaching the global implications of afterlife studies, one might also consider the potential for bridging religious divides. Historically differing doctrines about what happens post-mortem have fueled countless conflicts. Sects within the same religion have persecuted each other over divergences in theological interpretation, purgatory versus no purgatory bodily resurrection versus spiritual resurrection, reincarnation versus one-time judgment, and so on. Yet modern near-death research crosses these boundaries, uncovering universal motifs that transcend dogma. The presence of love, the review of life choices, the sense of continuing existence in some form. This doesn't mean that all religions are the same. Each holds unique rituals, symbols, and narratives. Still focusing on near-death parallels might highlight the shared human experience that underpins them. When it comes to healing, interfaith tensions, stories of personal transformation, and unconditional love can be more potent than abstract doctrine. Someone who was an atheist might have an NDE filled with light and acceptance. Another deeply religious might discover that the essence of their afterlife encounter aligns with universal compassion rather than the exclusivist teachings they expected. Such narratives can soften rigid boundaries. Interfaith dialogues could shift from defensive debates over whose doctrinal stance is correct to exploratory conversations about how each tradition's symbols and practices help believers transition from fear to acceptance. Scholars of religion, chaplains, and spiritual counselors who are conversant with NDE literature can approach dialogues with a spirit of curiosity. How does your faith tradition woo the life review, or what does unconditional love look like in your sacred texts, and how does it compare to near-death testimonies? In an era rife with sectarian strife, this pivot might open a new, more inclusive approach to understanding life's ultimate questions. Moreover, as global migration intensifies, communities become increasingly pluralistic. Medical professionals and hospice workers, for instance, encounter patients with a wide range of beliefs. Familiarity with NDE motifs can provide a neutral ground. Instead of superimposing a single religious frame on patients, a chaplain or counselor might draw on near-death narratives that resonate across tradition. This doesn't invalidate anyone's scriptures or spiritual heritage. It simply offers a flexible language that acknowledges the possibility of continued consciousness and the profound significance of compassion, forgiveness, and readiness at the end of life. Political and peace-building efforts might also gain an unexpected boost from the recognition that we share an existential journey. While it might sound idealistic, the idea that we'll all eventually face a life review or stand before a dimension of truth beyond human artifices could inspire greater accountability and empathy among leaders. If such perspectives became widespread, taken seriously by policymakers, some might reconsider short-sighted or divisive agendas in favor of long-term humane solutions. Of course, this is speculative, but it underscores how reconceptualizing death from a shared vantage could potentially influence the global ethos toward greater unity. Reflecting on the comprehensive narrative we've pieced together, life reviews, karmic ties, Bardo States guides, possible returns, union with the source, it's clear that none of these concepts exist in isolation. They form a tapestry of interdependent truths, each thread reinforcing or illuminating the other. Whether you approach the topic from the vantage of an empirical researcher, a devout believer, or a curious agnostic, the repeated motifs challenge us to think beyond material limits. While conclusive proof eludes us, the coherence of these stories suggests that consciousness could be far more versatile and enduring than conventional wisdom would have us believe. This tapestry also serves as a mirror reflecting our deepest hopes and fears. We see in it the possibility that love endures beyond physical dissolution, that justice is ultimately self-administered through life reviews, and that we might rectify mistakes by returning under new circumstances. At the same time, we confront the responsibility that arises from knowing we cannot hide from ourselves, either in this realm or the next. It warns us that illusions do not die with the body. They may persist in subtler planes, urging us to cultivate clarity and compassion here and now. Moreover, the near-death testimonies and spiritual texts we've surveyed do not by and large advocate escapism. They don't imply that life on Earth is unimportant or that we should neglect the tangible responsibilities of daily existence. Quite the contrary. Many experiencers come back with a renewed passion for life, seeing every moment as an opportunity to express kindness, creativity, and authentic presence. This suggests that glimpsing the afterlife doesn't negate earthly life, but rather infuses it with transcendent value. On a personal level, internalizing these themes can prompt a soul-level inquiry. What attachments am I unwilling to release? Where am I blocking the flow of love or clinging to fear? How can I serve both before and after I cross that veil? In some ways, these questions mirror those asked by initiates in mystery schools of ancient civilizations who rehearsed death in ritual contexts to free themselves from mundane shackles. Today, we might not have formal mystery schools in the same sense, but near-death research, hospice care, and contemplative traditions can fill similar roles, offering tools for psychological and spiritual preparation. Finally, there remains an element of awe. After all the analysis, the references to cultural practices, the scientific speculation, and the personal stories, the reality of death and whatever unfolds beyond retains an aura of sanctity. The greatness of this transition is perhaps the ultimate human mystery, humbling us before the vast unknown. By embracing that unknown with reverence rather than dread, we might discover a wellspring of wisdom, one that not only helps us face our final moments with equanimity, but also inspires us to live our present lives with vibrancy, courage, and boundless compassion. As we edge toward the conclusion of this exploration, let us address the potential criticisms and caveats that arise when discussing these afterlife possibilities. Skeptics often argue that near-death experiences are byproducts of a stressed or dying brain, citing chemical surges or oxygen deprivation as plausible causes for tunnel visions and sensations of euphoria. They point out that while some NDE details appear verifiable, the broader interpretations, angels' cosmic guides, life reviews could be shaped by cultural conditioning or wish fulfillment. Furthermore, certain psychological models suggest that the brain's best coping mechanism under extreme duress might be to generate comforting visions, a kind of last stand against despair. Others raise ethical concerns if we emphasize an afterlife too strongly. Might we trivialize death or risk encouraging escapism among those who are suicidal or depressed? Balancing these critiques is vital, reminding us that an open mind should not devolve into gullibility. On the other hand, the sheer volume of corroborated accounts where individuals accurately perceive events or details outside their physical vantage remains difficult to dismiss as mere hallucination. Studies have documented cases where patients report knowledge of conversations in distant hospital rooms or glimpses of their own resuscitation from above. While not infallible, such evidence suggests that something beyond a standard physiological explanation may be at play. Researchers continue to refine methodologies for investigating these phenomena, hoping to rule out confounding factors and gather increasingly reliable data. Another caveat is the interpretive variability. Two individuals may have near-death experiences that are both profound and life-altering, yet shape radically different belief systems afterwards. One might convert to a particular religion, convinced they met that tradition's deity, while another might embrace a more universal spirituality. This underscores that subjective frameworks and prior expectations can color how an NDE or spiritual encounter is understood. The phenomenon itself may be pointing to a reality beyond words, while each experiencer interprets it through their personal lens. Then there's the matter of spiritual bypassing, a concept in psychology where individuals latch on to spiritual ideas to avoid dealing with emotional or psychological wounds. For instance, someone might claim that death is just an illusion to dodge the real grief of losing a loved one. Or they might brush off moral accountability by assuming that if they can do a last-minute repentance or rely on cosmic love, the consequences of harmful actions will vanish. Both extremes misrepresent the deeper teachings about responsibility, empathy, and self-awareness that run through near-death accounts and spiritual texts. Being mindful of these criticisms and pitfalls does not negate the potential truths we've explored. Rather, it tempers enthusiasm with discernment, encouraging a mature approach. That approach recognizes the profound resonance of these accounts with our deepest intuitions about love, growth, and interconnectedness, yet also welcomes critical thinking. The interplay of faith, reason, experience, and humility might be the best posture in grappling with what remains humanity's greatest and perhaps most transformative frontier: what happens after we die. Now, drawing all threads together, we stand at the threshold of a comprehensive vision of death and the potential vistas that lie beyond. Our journey has taken us through historical funerary rites, near-death testimonies, bardo teachings, scientific investigations, and philosophical reflections. We have witnessed how cultures across continents have pointed to a layered existence, one in which our physical sojourn is but a single chapter in an ongoing cosmic story. Whether we call it the afterlife, the astral plane, the bardo, or simply a higher octave of reality. The message that emerges is remarkably consistent. Consciousness does not terminate at the body's end. Rather, it transitions, evolving through various states or dimensions shaped by our inner resonance. The immediate after-death phases, as frequently depicted, involve a life review, a space of clarity, free from the distortions of daily life. Here, we not only see our actions, but feel their ripple effects on others, learning through direct empathy. Next, we encounter realms that reflect our emotional and mental imprints, sometimes aided by benevolent guides or overshadowed by illusions of our own making. Love and fear become the fundamental forces steering our experience. Love inviting expansion into peaceful or luminous domains. Fear constricting us into darker or restless states. For those who move beyond these preliminary regions, the possibilities expand. We might choose rebirth if earthly lessons remain unfinished. We might remain in intermediate realms as teachers or helpers, or we might ascend into higher frequencies where the sense of individuality softens into a blissful communion with the Source. Along that route, we encounter the potential for soul contracts, pre-birth planning, karmic learning, and even the voluntary return of advanced souls who function as bodhisattvas, tulkus, or ascended masters, offering guidance to those still on the path. The overarching motif is one of learning and love the cosmos as a vast school, each soul a student and teacher simultaneously. On a day-to-day level, these insights inform how we might approach our own mortality and the deaths of those we love. Instead of a stark finality, death becomes a profound transition that calls for reverence, ritual, and readiness. We might invest in end-of-life care that acknowledges spiritual dimensions, seeing the dying process as a sacred rite rather than a mere medical event. Equally, we might shape education and community practices to foster open, healthy conversations about mortality, guiding future generations to approach life with a deeper sense of responsibility and wonder. None of this denies the grief and mystery inherent in losing someone close or facing our own impermanence. Human emotions, sadness, longing, and the sense of absence remain valid and natural. But the knowledge that consciousness may continue and relationships can transcend physical boundaries can temper the sting of separation with hope, or at least the willingness to consider a broader picture. In the largest sense, these reflections can encourage us to live more fully, with compassion, creativity, and accountability, knowing that every gesture imprints on the tapestry of our being, a tapestry that may extend well beyond the horizon of this single life. Ultimately, whether or not we accept these afterlife portrayals as literal truths, they can serve as powerful metaphors for growth. Imagining a life review, for instance, can guide us to treat each interaction as sacred. Embracing the possibility of reunion with loved ones might inspire us to cherish our relationships more profoundly here and now. And contemplating unity with Source can awaken a sense of the divine within our daily routines, transforming ordinary tasks into acts of devotion. The final breath, then, is not so final. It's a threshold to be met with awe. Having surveyed this expansive vista, we are in a sense more prepared to greet that threshold with grace and curiosity rather than fear. We may not hold absolute certainty, and perhaps that's part of the beauty. The eternal dance of consciousness, with its cycles of forgetting and remembering, invites us to keep learning, keep loving, and keep evolving, both in this world and the worlds that await when the last exhale merges into silence. After taking this journey together, it's clear there's something beautiful, hopeful, and undeniably reassuring about what awaits us beyond this life. We've explored countless experiences that suggest death isn't an end, but rather a gentle transition into deeper understanding and connection. These powerful insights remind us to cherish every moment here, living with compassion, gratitude, and purpose. Now, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Did this resonate with you? Have you or someone you know had similar experiences? Let's continue this conversation. Your insights enrich our shared understanding. Please share your reflections and personal stories in the comments below. Remember to subscribe if you'd like to explore more topics that delve into the mysteries of life and death. Together, we'll continue uncovering these incredible truths, bringing greater peace and awareness to our lives.